all but 2 of these At the Movies videos have talked about a Marvel movie. It just had to happen. This time, it's Marvel vs. Marvel at the movies, as the 2 movies with Venom go head to head. I've always wondered what was the more traumatizing Marvel event, the snap or the dance. After the results of the channel poll, I think a re-edit of Infinity War is required.
Now dig on this.
What'd you do? What'd you do?
Gonna cry?
In Spider-Man 3, we get Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker. He is the best Peter Parker, but this is his worst showing easily. We are told things are going well for him. He's top of his class at the college where the students act like they're still in high school. I have to wonder what changed to free up his time so he could become top of his class. In the last movie, he made the choice that he would rather struggle with life and be Spider-Man than give up being a superhero.
Sometimes, to do what's right, we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most. Even our dreams.
What's different now? Things go so well, he ends up getting too self-involved and loses Mary Jane. Meanwhile, he gets a random asteroid with some goo landing near his bike, and it gives him a black suit that makes him, well, he also beats the shit out of Harry, who kind of had it coming. Then he accidentally hits Mary Jane, who very much did not have it coming. Eventually, he gets rid of the suit, but not easily. Then he has to make peace with Harry and try to save Mary Jane from Venom and Sandman. This is the worst arc of Peter in the 3 movies by far. It's clear they want to do the opposite of Spider-Man 2. There, nothing went his way, and he had to rise above it. Here, everything is going his way, and he has to stop his big fat stupid head from ruining it all, which he fails at. The montage here is cringeworthy. It's clearly supposed to be this movie's variant of the raindrops keep falling on my head scene, except here, it seems like he can actually hear the music and dances to it a bit. He's not just overconfident, he's super cringy with it. There's contradictions with how people respond to it as well. Most people on the street act like you'd expect, but for some reason Betty is into it for no real discernible reason. Spider-Man 3 is weird. In Venom, we get Tom Hardy as Venom and Eddie Brock. It's worth mentioning both because he plays Eddie Brock and he also does the voice of Venom, so he really does play the whole character. How to sum up Eddie as a character is tricky. The beginning shows a fairly competent and successful reporter. He gets a chance to interview Carlton Drake, who is a successful businessman who's up to shady stuff. Eddie's girlfriend Anne is a lawyer who works for the firm that represents Drake. The night before his interview with Drake, Eddie notices that Anne gets an email about him. He can't resist. He goes into her email and gets the full message. In the interview, he confronts Drake about this, and then Drake uses his influence to destroy Brock's life as much as possible. He loses his job and his girlfriend all at once. When he is down on his luck, we see him hide when the store he is at is being robbed. One would normally infer that this means he's a coward, except this is a man who went into an interview with a very powerful man and accused that man of murder.
Your entire empire is built on dead bodies.
Eddie.
It's true, right? It says that you recruit the most vulnerable of us to volunteer for tests.
This tells us that Eddie is very much not a coward, which means all this scene in the story establishes is that Eddie is afraid of a man with a gun. Does that really need established? I think it's safe to assume most everyone is afraid of someone who is wielding a gun. Anne tells him he needs to take responsibility for his life.
You did this, Eddie. Not Carlton Drake, not the network, you.
And she is right. He was knocked down. It doesn't matter how you were knocked down or who knocked you down. It's up to you to get back up. However, she also says it's entirely his fault, and while he shouldn't have gone into her email, Carlton Drake was killing people, and trying to hold him accountable for his actions is hardly a bad thing. At the end, we have a character who is getting his life back together after the death of Carlton Drake. The reason for this turnaround is because of his bonding with the Venom symbiote. So the lesson of this movie is, if an alien wants to bond with you and form a symbiotic life form, do it. It will fix all your problems. Venom is weird. Between these two, at least Venom has shades of something maybe salvageable. Tom Hardy does a really good job here. His performance is weird, but it works in the end. In Spider-Man 3, Peter Parker is written in a way that Tobey Maguire doesn't remotely pull off. In his defense, I'm not sure anyone could. Venom and Eddie's story just feels like it's missing something, which it is, while Peter's story is actively bad. Point for Marvel. Sony. Venom.
Eddie, Jesus!
This is dead. Dead.
In Venom, we get Riz Ahmed as Carlton Drake, aka generic businessman villain. We also get Riot as the symbiote that merges with Drake. He is concerned that human beings will use up all the natural resources of Earth and thinks space holds the answer.
Overpopulation and climate change. These are two things that Drake cannot control.
Yeah, got it, right.
We are literally a generation away from an uninhabitable Earth.
When he gets the alien symbiote back, he decides to survive. We have to bring these symbiotes back, merge with them, and maybe go back into space. We are told Carlton Drake is a smart guy.
At 19, you discovered a gene therapy that literally doubles the life expectancy of pancreatic cancer.
Well, actually, it tripled their life expectancy.
But we never see it. His plan gets really stupid the more you break it down. He is dedicated to pushing the idea that symbiotes are the superior life form and doesn't seem to care about human life, even though he claims to want to save it. You could argue that he's just concerned with the human species, and individual humans don't matter if it means saving the race. He can only see the forest and not the trees. He apparently murders a lot of people to the point where he is in legal trouble for it.
You know, we think if somebody kills someone, that's murder, you go to prison. If you kill 10 people, you go to Texas, they hit you with a brick, that's what they do. 20 people, you go to a hospital, they look through a small window at you forever. And over that, we can't deal with it, you know? Somebody's killed 100,000 people. We're almost going, well done.
He threatens his scientists to get them to do unethical experiments.
Begin human trials.
Oh, it's way too soon to even begin to think
Dr.
about
Scrooge,
something
you're
like...
at the forefront of a scientific breakthrough. I need you to hold your nerve.
I understand, but
Think
it's
of
an
future
ethical
generations.
question.
Think of your kids. Hey, how are your kids?
And yet, as far as we see, he does need the scientist. He's supposed to be a genius. Yet, even with that resume, we are never shown any real serious intelligence from him. Just him working around other scientists doing science stuff. Then there's Riot. He's the leader of the alien symbiotes, and his goal is to conquer Earth. At least I think it is. To say Riot is a bit underdeveloped would be like saying Man of Steel uses Christ imagery.
Oh, well, no shit, Sherlock!
It's the understatement of the year. The character would have to have some development to be considered underdeveloped. Drake is underdeveloped. Riot is not even a character. In Spider-Man 3, we get two main villains again, except here, they're actually played by different actors. There's Thomas Haden Church as Sandman, and Topher Grace as Venom. We're going to start with the good. Sandman has a fairly cliche storyline, but it's sold with sincerity and conviction. He robs places to get money to treat his sick daughter. Not the most original motivation, but it feels genuine and works fairly well. While running from the cops, he ends up in a weird machine that turns stuff into sand. What a useful device, because I always felt like the world needed more sand.
I don't like sand.
That aside, the scene where he tries to reincorporate himself is actually really cool. We see his drive to help his daughter give him the will to rebuild himself.
It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
How he was forced into Spider-Man's origin was way less smooth. The biggest issue with it is it now retcons the story so that this guy is just a thief and dies for that crime alone. That seems way too extreme. I understand wanting to make a connection between Sandman and Spider-Man, but this was way too forced. Why not just do it the easy way and make Flint Marko one of the random thieves that Spider-Man has stopped? Have it set up so that Flint has an intense amount of rage for Spider-Man because, from his perspective, Spider-Man is stopping him from helping his daughter. Meanwhile, Spider-Man doesn't even remember the guy, which makes Marko more pissed. But hey, why do that when you can mess up one of the best origin stories ever done in a movie? Next, we have Topher Grace's Venom, and it's clear what they're doing here. They are changing Eddie Brock to to be an almost exact anti-Peter Parker. He's a guy with a similar build and demeanor, yet he is driven by selfishness, while Peter is driven by selflessness. In that manner, Topher Grace actually does alright in the role. There's a problem with that though. That's not who Eddie Brock is. Eddie Brock is a much rougher guy. He is a selfish guy in how he lies to get what he wants and blames others for his own failings, which they actually show here better than in the Venom movie. One thing this movie really misses is how the symbiote works. They never establish anything about the symbiote other than it enhances qualities in a person. Venom is stronger than Spider-Man and immune to his Spidey sense. I know this from the comic book, not from this movie. What it boils down to is that Spider-Man 3 has one fairly solid villain and one good attempt at a villain that suffers through miscasting and misunderstanding of parts of the character, while Venom has villains that are generic and boring and feel like cheap knockoffs of the same type of villains in better movies. This is a point for Spider-Man 3.
I don't like sand.
In Spider-Man 3, we get Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson, James Franco as Harry Osborn, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, Rosemary Harris as Aunt May, and Bryce Dallas Howard as Gwen Stacy. Weird random fact, they cast a redhead to play Gwen Stacy and a blonde to play Mary Jane. That seems strangely backwards. Anyways, all these characters feel like the same characters we saw before, but a bit more shallow. Mary Jane probably has the least damage done to her character, but that's mostly because this series was never sure what to do with her. She pursues an acting career, loves Peter, and gets kidnapped at the end. That's her role in every one of these movies, and this is just one of them. Harry is continuing his story from Spider-Man 2, and it has some real highlights, but he also has an amnesia story.
I know that face.
And the whole trying to steal MJ crap.
So good.
Lots of his story seems to come from bad soap opera writers. Aunt May gets a big speech again in this movie, except it's way more boring. And while the idea behind it is nice,
a man has to be understanding and put his wife before himself.
It's not always practical. Jameson doesn't have any unique moments here, and instead just has a weird blood pressure shtick.
Your blood pressure, Mr. Jameson. Your wife told me to tell you to watch the anger.
You tell my wife!
Thank you.
Thank God J.K. Simmons is still in top form. And Gwen Stacy is there. In Venom, we have Michelle Williams as Anne Wang, Reed Scott as Dr. Guy who's dating Anne, Jenny Slate as Scientist Lady, and, if you believe the credits, Scott Hayes as that security guy that Eddie talks to who actually gets his credit before the Dr. Guy and Scientist Lady.
WTF, Gary? WTF.
What the fuck does WTF mean?
Anne is Eddie's girlfriend at the beginning who breaks up with him after she finds out he logged into her email to get information on Drake. She's trying to move on while Eddie holds on to hope that they'll get back together. She leads him to Dan, who puts Eddie in an MRI once he has Venom and temporarily separates them. Scientist Lady works for Drake and has her family threatened, causing her to reach out to Eddie for help. And when he goes to investigate, he gets Venom. And after she is found out, she is bonded with a symbiote and killed in the process. As for the security guy, he gets like 2 scenes. I think Dalton might have a bigger role in this movie. Oh, and also attacks the symbiote in the final battle with sound.
Told you I could fight ugly.
If you can't tell, these aren't characters as much as props to move the plot. In Spider-Man 3, at least these are characters. This is an easy point for Spider-Man 3.
And I know you will find a way to put it right. In time.
Venom is weird again. In the beginning, it really doesn't have much action except for Riot killing people. The action starts when Venom and Eddie meet, and it starts fine, but pales in comparison to Upgrade, which came out just a few months earlier. And then, every action scene after that is just a little bit worse, until the ending. The CGI battle here makes the CGI battle in Wonder Woman look like great art. It's just a mess, where half the time you can't even tell what is happening. Spider-Man 3 has some weird action as well. A lot is clearly green screened, like this thin gap that Harry Osborn is flying through. How's that possibly enough room for Spider-Man to swing through? It's clearly not an actual confined space. Funky green screens aside, the fights here are very memorable, with the real highlight being the stuff with Sandman. It's very reminiscent of the T-1000, where you just have no idea how Spider-Man can actually do anything to stop him. That is, until he turns into mud for a bit. The best fight scene is easily the fight between Peter and Harry at Harry's mansion. It's a very personal fight, and it feels it. This is an easy point for Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 3 is all about forgiveness. Peter has to forgive Sandman, Harry has to forgive Peter, Mary Jane has to forgive Peter, Peter has to forgive Harry, Venom has to... Well, Peter says this line about forgiveness to Eddie.
You want forgiveness? Get religion.
Still, this theme leads to some of the best moments in the movie. Peter and Sandman's talk at the end is very touching, and it would be nice if they agreed that he would...
Stop breaking the law, asshole!
But other than that, it's a very nice moment. Harry's self-sacrifice shows an incredible amount of growth for his character. A willingness to not just forgive Peter, but also step out from his father's shadow and recognize that Peter has been the more positive influence on his life. The ending scene that is wordless with Peter giving Mary Jane his hand and the two dancing is incredibly well done and deserves a much better movie. The theme is this movie's strength. Where this movie fails worse is when it tries to emulate Spider-Man 2. The jazz music montage is clearly supposed to be this movie's version of the music montage in Spider-Man 2 of Peter not being Spider-Man, but they represent two different things. One shows a man choosing a simpler life, where the other shows a man who's way too confident for his own good. Having someone embrace the simple side of life with a goofy music montage makes sense. Having a person act like a madman with a goofy music montage does not. Aunt May's overlong speech was amazing in Spider-Man 2, but here, it's just overlong. The end of the dance scene where Peter accidentally hits Mary Jane is decent enough to show how much Peter has fallen, but the dance scene is just horrid. The news reporter exposition dumps are obnoxious in the final battle. Sure, maybe have them introduce Spider-Man to the threat, even though they could maybe instead call Peter from Mary Jane's phone instead. But later, they are literally telling the audience what they should be feeling.
This could be a tragic day for the people of New York. It could be the end of Spider-Man.
That is lazy and stupid. Venom is all about a guy getting an alien symbiote on him and fighting another guy with an alien symbiote. Deep stuff. It's a weird movie. Has a feel of a late 90s comic book movie with how liberally it uses and ignores source material. In the 90s, it wouldn't have been because they didn't want to appear too comic booky. Now, that's a good thing. In this movie, it's because they can't use Spider-Man in a live-action movie unilaterally because of Sony's current deal with Marvel. And Spider-Man is such a huge part of Venom's origin that ignoring him is a disservice to the Venom character. Here, Venom and Eddie bond because they are both losers.
On my planet, I am kind of a loser, like you. But here, we could be more.
Originally, they bond because of their mutual hatred of Spider-Man. Here's some weird facts about this movie. It is 112 minutes long. The credits are rolling by the 92-minute mark. It includes a 5-minute scene of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and a 2-minute mid-credit scene. Why does this movie feel the need to stretch out its runtime for so long? It seems like the best way to handle this movie would have been to not do an origin story. Elements here are clearly borrowed from the miniseries Venom Lethal Protector. So why not just ignore the origin stuff and tell a more comic book accurate version of Lethal Protector? Sure, Spider-Man is part of that story too, but he's much easier to remove from there than an origin story. Focus on making this story as strong as possible, and that way Kevin Feige might not object to sharing Venom with Spider-Man. And then for the sequel, they can do an origin. Instead, they just rushed this out and did the quickest version of the Venom origin they could, and instead of having Spider-Man, they just replaced him with nothing. The story feels as though elements are missing because they clearly are. The story should be about taking responsibility for your own actions, but they made Eddie too good, and he comes off as a fairly decent guy who just made mistakes. Here's a weird fact. The very beginning of this movie, starting with the ship crashing and the alien jumping from person to person, is actually not bad at all. It's got a strong horror feel, and if the movie went for an angle like that, that would have been potentially awesome. A story with a traditional superhero narrative, yet directed as a horror movie. That could be cool, but then we get the rest of the movie, and it's all downhill from there. Spider-Man 3 has severe missteps, but it's clear that there are people trying to make this a really good movie. Venom was well executed, but doesn't have enough. These movies are opposites in their stories. Spider-Man 3 is overloaded, while Venom is underloaded. Neither works well. But in a pinch, at least one shows some creativity and a serious effort to be a quality story. Point for Spider-Man 3.
I forgive you.
Ruben Fletcher is a good director. He and Tom Hardy are pretty much the sole reasons why Venom is just a bad movie, not a complete shit show like it should be. His direction here is fairly solid. Nothing super standout, but solid. The CGI ranges from iffy to good enough. Spider-Man has a lot of CGI that looked good at the time, but hasn't aged well at all. That being said, this movie also has the Raimi visual style, which is also welcome. It also has some great visual storytelling with the reformation of Sandman and the final scene with Peter and Mary Jane. Both movies had their visual missteps and their visual flares, but Raimi brought far more to the table than Fletcher. This is a point for Spider-Man 3. The sound design in Spider-Man 3 works well, but it's nothing new that hasn't already been established in other movies. However, the score by Christopher Young, with the help of Danny Elfman, is outstanding. You honestly can't tell Elfman is missing. That's how well Young does here. The two outstanding visual scenes have scores to back them up, and it does so wonderfully. The sound design for Venom works well enough. The slimy sounds of the symbiote do the job. But the action sounds for the restaurant scene are excessive. The soundtrack by Ludwig Göransson works, but is very standard. It's very solid, yet run-of-the-mill sound.
Oh, God, no!
This is another easy point for Spider-Man 3. So now we get Topher Grace as Eddie Brock in Venom versus Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock in Venom. There's a bit to break down here. First off, Tom Hardy is a way better casting choice for the character. I wish he was cast in Spider-Man 3 instead of Grace. It's not that Grace is a bad actor, he's actually a very good actor. This role simply does not suit him well at all. The origin story here is interesting. Overall, with the black suit attempting to merge with Spider-Man and being rejected, only to find another with the hatred for Peter Parker and able to merge with that person very effectively, that's key story elements to Venom and seen in Spider-Man 3. And while neither does Spider-Man fighting the black suit comic accurate because that would require a secret war, Venom does have the symbiote in a shuttle with John Jameson, which is how the symbiote gets on Earth in the animated series in the 90s. It makes way more sense than it just landing near Peter. Venom also shows a duality between Eddie and Venom. They use the word we.
No, we won't let you destroy this world.
And they are very much two separate entities inhabiting the same space. Something Spider-Man 3 never really establishes. In fact, Venom never even says we. He always refers to himself as I or me in Spider-Man 3.
I want him dead too, Flint. That's why I've been looking for you. I know all about you.
It's just, it doesn't seem right to me. I want to kill the spider. You want to kill the spider. Ooh, my spider sense is tingling. If you know what I'm talking about. I'm thinking humiliation. Kind of like how you humiliated me. Do you remember what you did to me? You made me lose my girl. I like being bad.
It makes me happy.
Neither movie gets it right, and it feels like if you combine elements of the two, you'd get really close. Overall, Venom does have a much better handle on the character, so the bonus point goes to Venom. Both these movies suck, but neither are complete crapshoots. Spider-Man 3 was riding high off the incredible Spider-Man 2, and it was expected to be the next big classic superhero movie, and it was a letdown. Venom, on the other hand, had no hope at all. It was assumed it would be awful, and while it is at least coherent and not the worst thing ever, that is such a low bar. Venom gets credit for not being the worst thing ever, but that just shows how little was expected of it. Maybe, one day, being a good movie with Venom in it. I think Spider-Man 3 may have gotten really close to having a good Venom if Tom Hardy was cast instead of Topher Grace. Their goals with Grace were clear, but didn't work.
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.